The Brady Bill by Kirti, Abby, Preity, Connor, and Sam. How Brady became a bill. The Brady Bill was named after James Scott Brady. John Hinckley shot him on March 30, 1981, during an attempted assassination of President Ronald Reagan. Brady and his wife believed that if a background check was done on Hinckley, none of this would have happened because he would not have received a firearm as he was mentally ill. What is the Brady Bill? The Brady Bill is a provision of the United States federal law that requires a 5-day waiting period on handgun purchases and background checks on those who wish to purchase handguns. It was enacted by President Bill Clinton on November 30, 1993, but it only became effective on February 28, 1994. More about the Brady Bill. The Brady Bill falls under the state's powers. The use of formula grants are used under the Brady Bill. The objective of the Brady Bill was to provide law enforcement officials with an easier way to make sure that guns do not get into the hands of an unlicensed individual. Arguments. National government's arguments. Background checks restrict those diagnosed with mentally illnesses from obtaining firearms, prevent criminals from obtaining firearms, reduce gun violence in gang-prone neighborhoods, and keep guns out of the hands of people who are most likely to commit suicide, which overall will increase public safety. Many other countries have universal background checks, and universal background checks are used in Canada, Japan, the United Kingdom, etc., which provide insight to the effectiveness of the laws. State governments' arguments. The Constitution's Appropriations Clause stated that federal money can only be spent by Congress. This means the Brady Bill violated the accountability principle. Congress regulated intrastate commerce, a power reserved for the states through the 10th Amendment. Time for the debate. State's first argument. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Samantha Daly, and I'm arguing for the rights of the states. The Brady Bill imposed on state rights and was not an appropriate action taken by the federal government. One example of this is the Appropriations Clause, which states that only Congress can spend federal money. Congress also has the exclusive power to raise revenues and collect taxes. This means that the Appropriation Clause holds up the principle of fiscal accountability. Congress violated this principle of fiscal accountability. By ordering the states to enact the Brady Bill, the states were required to cut funding and raise revenue in order to support this, not Congress. Another example of this was the example of interstate commerce. Congress, therefore, by creating this law, was regulating interstate commerce. The sale of guns within a state is considered interstate commerce. By putting regulations on the time in which a gun is sold, it was regulating interstate commerce, which is a power reserved to the states by the 10th Amendment. This, all in all, was considered unconstitutional.
National first argument. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, I'm Abby Burnett, arguing for the side of the federal government. The Brady Bill is a necessary action because it implements a universal background check to prevent criminals and mentally ill people from obtaining guns. Many shootings and murders have occurred because of mentally ill people that should not have been able to get a gun in the first place. In fact, according to the Center for American Progress, 93% of assailants exhibited behavior that caused a school official, parent, or law enforcement officer to be concerned before the attack, and 66% of these attackers were known to be real threats by at least one person. A lack of background checks also allows convicted criminals to easily access guns. An analysis of firearm murders of police officers between 1980 and 2013 found that 61% of the murderers were convicted felons. These felons were not allowed to possess a gun, but were able to acquire a gun partly because of the weak gun laws and background checks that vary from state to state. In the 20 years since the enactment of the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, more than 2.1 million illegal firearm sales, including 1 million attempted purchases by convicted felons, have been stopped. When each state has its own policy and requirements for background checks, loopholes that make it easier for a criminal or dangerous individual to acquire a gun are created. The Brady Bill appeases these issues without infringing on the civil liberties guaranteed to citizens in the Second Amendment and without infringing on states' rights because the bill incorporates the concept of cooperative federalism, where both the national and state governments share powers of enacting this bill.
State's second argument. You have 2 minutes.
And I'm going for the side of the states. Laws similar to the Brady Bill had no beneficial impact on any certain category of crime, according to the University of Maryland criminologist David Dowell, who performed an analysis on the effects of extended waiting periods in large cities. He found that waiting periods had no influence on murder or suicides. Therefore, the creation of the Brady Bill had no effect to crime rate.
National second argument. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, I'm Kirti and I'm going to be arguing for the side of the federal government. Many countries have universal background checks, such as Japan, Canada, and the UK, which provide insight to the effectiveness of gun laws and background checks. Canada requires a license to own a gun and ammunition and buyers to pass safety courses. Licenses must be renewed every 5 years, and licensing requires fairly stringent background checks. According to the Library of Congress's review on Canada's laws, an applicant for a firearm license in Canada must pass background checks which consider criminal, mental addiction, and domestic violence records. The background checks also consider whether an applicant has been treated for a mental illness, if the person was associated with violence, threats, or attempted violence, and whether the person has any behavior that includes violence. On top of traditional background checks, each license applicant needs to submit third-party character references. In addition to licensing requirements, Canadians can only obtain a permit to carry firearms in the public in very limited circumstances, typically with the requirement that an individual needs restricted firearms or prohibited handguns for the use in connection with his or her lawful. Japan and the United Kingdom also require a similar process to be followed to receive a firearm. And all of these restrictions have been proven to be effective, as gun violence in these countries are significantly low when compared to the United States, according to a study conducted by Global News.
State's first question.
For Abby, what evidence can you introduce that supports the fact that the Brady Bill helped reduce different categories of crime?
There is evidence supporting that the Brady Bill reduces crime. According to Giffords Law Center, before the Brady Bill was enacted, America's gun homicide rates increased by 55% from 1984 to 1993. After the Brady background checks were required, gun homicide rate dropped by 32% from 1993 to 2006. The rate of robberies and aggravated assaults committed with firearms also decreased by 42% during this time.
National first question.
Question for Sam. Where is the constitutional text found that disproves the legitimacy and constitutionality of the Brady Bill?
There is no specific clause that the decision was based on. However, judicial interpretation of the Constitution found that the Brady Bill was an overreach of Congress's power. An example of this is the Accountability Clause, which was explained earlier.
State second question.
Question for Connor. Do you have any evidence or studies directly done on the Brady Bill that supports your claim saying it has not been effective in reducing crime?
Well, according to Philip J. Cook, a Duke University professor in public policy, the Brady Bill seems to have been a failure. He also claims that gun control and treatment laws states had produced very close or the same homicide rates before and after the Brady Bill was passed. Question for Kirti. What evidence do you have that directly supports how other countries' homicides lowered through background checks?
According to Denmark, gun violence in virtually all its guises has significantly come down with the aid of stricter enforcement and waves of police anti-weapons operations. The most current statistics available showed that firearms were used to kill 59 people in all of England and Wales in 2011, compared with 77 such homicides that same year in Washington, D.C. alone.